about that. I know that I add the coconut curry or the coconut milk to tame down the heat of the peppers, but who knew? Who knew? So yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful to hear. Just like we said last week, knowledge is really the first step, just sort of
Mhm,
knowing that we have to pay
mhm,
attention, knowing
mhm,
what to look for.
mhm.
Anybody else have any more or make any more adjustments, have revelations or make shifts in
Well,
this
just
past
to
week?
add, I wasn't in the class last week, but since the last class I was in, you talked about the whole sugar. And so
Uh-huh.
I've been thinking about that because I was steering clear of lots of fruit, due
Mm-hmm.
to the doctor. But yeah, nutritionists, and they were saying kind of like, be careful because some fruit has a lot of sugar in it, and so thinking about it versus like whole sugar versus like added sugar. So I've
Mm-hmm.
been uh I've eaten more like mandarin oranges in the last few weeks than I had eaten in probably a year. And I haven't
Wow.
eaten like 20, but I have because I was like steering clear of oranges. I was steering clear of bananas and just like being mindful of the fruit. But I also check my blood sugar often, so I know I
Mm-hmm.
can see the effect it is having, if any. And
Yeah.
then I also had a conversation with my cousin because she was about to eat something, and so we were looking at the label. Oh, I think it was like a honey oat bar or something. And so
Mm-hmm.
I was explaining to her about the sugar, and then that if it's like 9 grams of sugar, and then all of it is added sugar, like all the sugar that is in there was put in there. It's not like natural. So she's
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, so she thought it was like 9 + 9 is 18. I was like, no, it's like for each gram that's in there, it was put in there, so so she's like, oh, I had never looked at that. And I was like, so you want to have the least amount of added sugar as possible. Um,
Yes.
so yeah, so I've been mulling that over in
Yeah.
my head a lot and like explain that to other people too. Another cousin, we were talking about sugar. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so yeah, so I wasn't there last week, but I have been thinking about what we talked about at the beginning. And
That
your
is
text messages have
huge.
been talking about sugar too. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So you've been plugged in, text message, and then, the things that we talked about at the last meeting
Hmm.
you attended. That's amazing. First of all, just like round of applause for going out and teaching other people, like people you care about,
Yeah.
teaching them how
My
they can protect
yeah.
themselves.
Yeah, my trade is education, so like that's what I think I kind of lean towards making sure other people know what I know. If I learn something, I want them to know.
That is
So
amazing. Good job to you, Dr. Michelle, and Miss Cheryl, and I think I heard Miss Maddie in there had something to say. I don't want to I don't want to blow past you. Did you have something to add, Miss Maddie?
No, I'm like everyone else. I have read labels, and it's amazing how many added sugars have been
Yes.
added to processed food. I mean, it's added to just about everything that's processed.
Yes.
It seems that
Yes.
way. It seems that way.
Mhm. And so part of the reason for that is practical. So sugar is a preservative, just like
Right,
salt,
right.
just like spice.
Yes, it's
And
right.
so um, companies that mass produce foods that will sit on a shelf, like we talked about the coconut curry sauce. When I buy that coconut curry sauce from the store, it's never refrigerated. And I bring it home, I put it in my pantry. In the past, and not in the past, but occasionally, I will make a version of coconut curry sauce, right? Or just add possibly unsweetened coconut milk, um, cumin to a stir fry, my old seasonings, and it kind of turns into a coconut curry mix. I couldn't leave that out on the counter or in my pantry for 2 days. It would spoil, it would grow
Mhm,
mold.
mhm.
So that kind of gives you a sense of what's been put in um, foods like the coconut curry sauce that, like I said, I will buy from the store. There are preservatives, and some of those have like kind of funny names, but some of the other preservatives are just sugar. Some of the other preservatives are just salt, and that's how it maintains its shelf life. So you are so right, Miss Maddie. When you start paying attention to the sugar content, specifically the added sugar content in these
Yes.
processed foods, it's mind blowing. There's just so much there, and it exists for a practical reason. Okay. And then Miss Bridget, did you have anything to add? Dr. Bridget.
Yes. So I guess after last week when we took the inventory of who had whole sugars versus processed sugars, I made a point of eating a lot of fruit. And I'm not a juice drinker or soda drinker, so that's never a problem. I think someone mentioned sugar in their coffee. I drink black coffee, so that's never a problem. But I made a point of not reaching for anything that was just available to me. I chopped up melons and took them to work. And it was so easy to do and filling, and it made me very regular for the whole week. So it was worth it. It was so it was worth it. So I actually feel so much better about doing that. And I always have fruit in the house, but to think that I don't grab it to take it to work with me just didn't make any sense. And now that I had to think about it, what could I choose? Well, I could just grab the apples and put them in my bag and chop them up later if I wanted to, if I didn't have time to do it in the morning. So that's the change that I made. And I can stick with that change. It actually worked out well for me.
That is so good to hear. You all are doing an amazing job.
I will say too that I was in Chicago last week, and
nice.
And I was in a hotel, and so I actually went to the store and grocery shopped while I was there. Like I bought a big watermelon because when they cut them up for you, it's very expensive.
Right.
So so that was something. It's like, okay, this, instead of going, like I did have one of my favorites, but in the whole week I ate most of the food that I brought there to the room, and not just going to a restaurant just because I was not home.
That's
so amazing. I had to make sure I got a hotel room that had a refrigerator and microwave. And was able to eat more food I literally went to Pete's Market and went grocery shopping. And they have great smoothies and juices, by the way, at Pete's.
Really?
Didn't yes, like healthy. I mean, I'm not thinking about detox juice. I was like, wait, this is really detox for real. So Bridget, you and I probably spent the same amount of time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Healthy colons all around. This is good to hear, guys. You mentioned a point that we discussed in the last week's session, and that was, I think, this kind of third point we summed up, which is, after you know what you should be eating, and after you're able to be mindful of what you actually are eating, just be aware of what's going into your body and manage your cravings. Then the third part is kind of redesigning your environment to make sure the stuff that you want to eat is as available as possible, which is easy as pie to grab it. And the stuff that you want to eat less of, because you know that it breaks you down more than it builds you up, that stuff is really hard to get to. So we saw from Dr. Bridget, Dr. Michelle, both you're highlighting that availability heuristic, the availability bias that all of us humans have. By bringing an apple to work with you, that's what you're going to grab instead of those chocolate covered raisins in the trail mix that you mentioned. And then when Dr. Michelle travels, simply going to the grocery store and having the food available, so you don't have to run out to the restaurant or to fast food across the street and be tempted and eat that because you're hungry and your body actually does need fuel. So that's amazing. This is so gratifying to hear. This is why we do this, to keep women like you healthy and strong, so you can uplift yourselves and keep on doing the work that you're doing for your communities. Everybody needs you to stay well. So congratulations on being here. Okay. I feel like I could just hug you, give you like virtual and verbal hugs for much longer. But I'm gonna share my screen here and just get into a quick quiz about free and added sugars, just adding on to what we discussed over these last couple weeks. Let's get excited. Can you see my screen here?
Yes.
Okay. So the question here, you're going to have a bunch of options, and the question is going to be which one of these is not an added sugar? Which one of the letters?
A.
D. Either A or D.
A.
A or D?
I'll say A.
Okay. We got one more left. It is tough.
When things are gluten free, they're free of wheat. I know that. Oh, I'm sorry.
Right.
I would say A.
Yeah. Yeah. So exactly. So A is right. Granulated sugar, high fructose corn syrup, and believe it or not, honey are
Honey.
considered added sugars.
Mhm.
Now, you might go back and forth on honey because some people will say that's a whole sugar because it has a number of nutrients, because it comes from the honey comb, right? It seems less processed, say, than table sugar, which is refined sucrose. But the reality is, in the same way that whole food sugars, say sugars in an apple, are accompanied by the fiber component of that apple,
Don't leave it.
the honeycomb would be the fiber component
Yeah.
of honey.
So how long is he gonna be on there?
So in general, I think we can, thank you. In general, if we've got honey as an ingredient in a food, that counts as an added sugar. It's
Mhm.
really unlikely that the honeycomb the fibrous component was also added to, the cookie or whatever it is that we're eating, or even the coffee, right? The tea. So again, your body's response to the honey, to the free sugars in this honey, is similar to your body's response to table sugar, is similar to your body's response to agave syrup. It processes these different types of sugars slightly differently. There's like a difference between how the body processes fructose versus sucrose, and glucose. But really, in general, your body is going to, your blood sugar is going to increase with honey. Your blood sugar is going to increase with agave syrup, with granulated sugar, with high fructose corn syrup here. Gluten is a component of wheat. It's one of the starchy components of wheat. So some might argue that in the very end, gluten does turn into sugar in your body. But here on the ingredients list, this is not considered an added sugar. Does that make sense?
Yes. Mhm.
Okay.
Yes.
So we've
Yes.
got these.
Mhm.
I'm glad that we had some question about this first one, because I've read blogs and I've talked to folks who will say that honey is not an added sugar and that we have just license to use it as much as we want. But the reality is, just like you want to be careful with like concentrated fruit juice, something else that sounds relatively natural, the reality is, if you're pulling just the sweet component, just the sugar component out of the entire food, then that's an added sugar if you're pulling it out and then adding it to something else. So we treat it the same way. Okay. Next. All right. Which ingredient is not an added sugar? Sorghum, sucanat, sucrose, and starch, potato starch.
D. Oh, wait, no, never mind. No.
This is another tricky one.
I'm gonna say, what is sucanat?
So guess what?
I can't tell you.
I don't even know what sucanat is, but it came from a list of added sugars.
It's B. Oh, you gave us the answer already.
No,
I did give
I
you the
think
answer.
so B is an added sugar?
It is.
The starch.
Okay.
Yeah. So if we cross B off the list and we say that's an added sugar, what do you
D.
choose from there?
A.
What isn't?
A, I would say A will be A.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know sucrose
A.
is an added sugar.
Yes. Sucrose is an added sugar. We're going to get to that rule in a second, but things that end in OSE,
E,
that's
yes.
the suffix for sugar, ose. That is an added sugar. It's a sugar, right? It's added to food. It's an added sugar. Sucanat, I'm going to look this up for you so I can tell you for sure. But it's on our added sugar list. Sorghum is an added sugar that's it's a plant that's kind of like
Right.
cane sugar.
Cane sugar, yeah.
Harvested and turned into sugar. So if you see sorghum, and it's kind of a gummy product too, so you might be more inclined to see it in maybe in jellies and in like puddings, things that'll have a gummy texture. But if you see sorghum on the ingredients list, that's an added sugar. Sucanat, we're going to look this up so I can give you a very definitive answer on what it actually is, but it's an added sugar. Sucrose is a sugar. This is table sugar. It's the white stuff that you pour in coffee or you bake with. And then potato starch. This is a starch, which again, we've said at the very end of the day, your body converts to sugar, but technically on the ingredients list, this is not an added sugar.
So that's what was
Yeah.
hard for me, because I knew starch is a complex sugar at the end of the day, but it's not considered an added sugar.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. It's I guess the nomenclature is kind of tricky here. Our goal is to identify what counts as an added sugar so that we can find it on the ingredients list and kind of cross that off, right? But a little bit later on, not today, but later in our sessions, we'll talk about starch, these complex layers of multiple sugars that your body eventually breaks down into sugar. And so we'll talk about how starches can be either more healthy for you, or in the case of sweet potatoes, because they come with fiber and they come with vitamins. And then we'll talk about how starches can also be less healthy for you because they've been refined and they've been surrounded by added sugars in a processed dessert, for example, like a ho-ho, right? Or a muffin that we might get from the store. So starch is not something, because I've got potato starch on this list, that's not necessarily something that you need to, that you can feel free to eat with reckless abandon, right? But it is not on our added sugars list.
1
I
second.
can see how that's confusing. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just found out that sucanat is actually cane sugar that's been, I guess, they extract the juice from it and they heat it in a vat, and then they take that juice, the dark syrup from the cane sugar cane, and they paddle it until it becomes dried granules.
Got
and
it.
it's supposedly it's the least refined of the cane sugars.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you. I was just looking that up. That's helpful. So this is why it's an added sugar. It's a sugar. It's a derivative of cane sugar. So one of the things that we take away from this is, all right, you might look up sucanat and read that it's the least refined of the cane sugars. And, you know, it may be implied that there are some positive health consequences for that. But what we're emphasizing here is it's not so much the characteristics of the added sugar that are better for you or worse for you, right? It's kind of the fact that it is an added sugar. It's the sugar component that has been removed from a whole food, that has been added to something else, some other food or drink, and it's been added without the training wheels that help your body metabolize it. It's been added without the extra fiber that naturally grows with the sugar. It's been added often without many of the nutrients and vitamins that can be really helpful. So added sugars are things for us to just watch out for. Thank you for looking that up. Any other questions on these four? No, okay.
Well, I do have a question about just, okay, so since those are, a couple of those are derivatives of cane sugar, so if someone, like my husband, his family is from Louisiana, and they would eat like right out of the cane, like the sugar cane. It's just
Like
not, yeah, they would be in the sugar cane field and would be eating it. So
that's interesting.
Since that's like the raw sugar.
That's kind of whole sugar. If they're able to eat the fiber part.
They were eating, I don't know about that part. They weren't taking it home. They were like, he said they would be like out there eating the sugar cane.
That's actually really interesting. So that's like the equivalent of, grabbing a piece of honeycomb and just eating it, taking bites of it along with the honey. You're not going to get nearly as much honey doing as much of the sugar component doing that as if you were to eat the sugar alone, right? Or the sugar removed from all the fibrous piece, the fibrous element. And because of the way sugar metabolism works, so fiber keeps your blood sugar from rising as quickly. It keeps your body from absorbing sugar as quickly as when the sugar is not surrounded by either fiber or protein. And that means that instead of your blood sugar levels spiking because you've had this giant sugar load into your stomach, they rise a little bit more slowly. And what that does is, instead of telling your body, hey, I've got this giant surplus of energy, because that's all your body sees sugar as. It's just a ton of energy all at once. Right. And you're laughing, Ms. Cheryl. It's funny, right? But that's why sugar isn't bad in and of itself. We need some sugar. We just need it to be high quality sugar. So when we get that sugar load and the blood sugar spikes and the body says, whoa, we've got tons, we've got energy for days. Let's store some of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when it gets turned into fat. It goes to the liver. And that's actually what turns into cholesterol and the bad cholesterol, LDL. That's what increases levels of inflammation in our bodies. So it's not so much the fat that we eat that turns into cholesterol. And this part is kind of mind blowing. It's more the excess sugar that we eat and the level to which our blood sugar spikes and how often it spikes.
That's news. That's interesting.
Yeah. So sugars end up being incredibly important for managing all of these chronic diseases that we think of as related to high cholesterol, right? In addition to the diseases we think of as related to sugar issues like type 2 diabetes, It's kind of the root of everything. Okay, so in addition to increasing levels of circulating cholesterol and increasing levels of fat, excess sugar causing blood sugar spikes increases our risk of obesity, just excess weight gain. And we talked about that, I think a couple weeks ago, maybe, where we talked about how, you know, your body actually needs fat. And when it has the right amount of fat, fat does great things for us. It's a living organ, just like your liver or your brain. It creates hormones, it communicates with other organs. It helps to control your blood sugar, it helps to control your blood pressure. But when we make too much circulating fat, and it gets sent to these little fat cells, think of this fat cells as the houses, and we put all the little particles of fat in the houses, they blow up, they become dysfunctional, and that is when the fat actually starts to dysregulate your blood sugar and dysregulate your blood pressure and causes problems because it's an unhealthy fat essentially. Before those little houses, those fat cells get stuffed, they do a really great job of keeping us in line, of managing our hunger, of managing all these other important functions in our body, working with the rest of our body to do that. So what is at the root of this excess fat deposition and this unhealthy fat? Well, excess added sugars that spike your blood sugar. Anytime that your body is like on a regular basis saying, whoa, I've got more energy than I need. Whoa, I've got so much more energy than I need. And it gets stored, that converts to fat. That leads to weight gain. That can lead to type 2 diabetes, can lead to heart disease, can lead to high blood pressure. It all comes back to the sugar. It's incredible.
Yes.
We've got one more here, guys. And I spelled one wrong. But we've got one more quiz, and then I'll let you off the hook. This is hopefully confusing enough to learn from, but not too confusing. So which one is not an added sugar?
B.
What was
Is the
that?
B
Which
or
one?
I'm saying B.
A.
I'll say B, lactose.
I'll say B also.
Okay.
I'd say A.
We've got someone saying orange juice is
Yeah,
not the
I think-
added sugar.
yeah, I think I'm gonna say A. Out of the four, I think I'll say A as well.
Okay, so we're split. Orange juice, not an added sugar, versus lactose, not an added sugar. So we said something earlier about that OS.
But a toast, OSE.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
What?
We said the suffix when it ends in os or OSE, that actually means, like in biology terms, that means sugar.
Sugar, okay.
So whenever you see the ending OSE,
Yeah, okay.
lactose, dextrose, sucrose, glucose, fructose, all of that is sugar, right? So here's what could be confusing about this, and I'm really glad we have a chance to talk about it. Lactose is natural in dairy products. It's natural in milk, naturally found in milk. So if you see lactose, right, if someone tells you, well, lactose is in milk, in that setting, it's not an added sugar. We'll call it a free sugar, but it's not an added sugar because it's naturally occurring in milk. It's maybe, but occasionally you find it added to other food products. And so if you're looking at the ingredients label and it says lactose, as in this is it doesn't say milk, right? It doesn't say milk has been added. It says lactose was added. Then specifically, it's an added sugar. And so where can we see that? Sometimes we'll see that in creams or creamy products. Sometimes you'll see that in like yogurt parfaits that you might buy from a cafe that have been sometimes mixed with additional cream, sometimes mixed with additional milk and had sugar added to it. So yeah, lactose is our added sugar. Sounds like none of you all fell for the molasses trick.
Mhm.
You know, some people will talk about how blackstrap molasses is a healthier type of sugar for us because it actually has quite a few polyphenols, like these plant superpower ingredients that I keep talking about. It comes with a number of nutrients in the way that honey and agave do. But like we said earlier, the reality is if molasses, just the sugar portion, right, which is molasses, is added to a food, if you see molasses on an ingredients list, this is an added sugar. And it doesn't help us nearly so much as we would like to hope that it has, you know, other nutrients, that it may have more magnesium in it than like table sugar, for example. Your body is still, the way your body responds to it, still going to spike that blood sugar up way high, and your body's still going to say, whoa, I've got so much energy. Whoa, I've got so much energy, and start storing it and turn it to fat and do all those things we just talked about. That happens when you've got an influx of fat because you had way too much energy. So, okay. Sounds like none of you all fell for high fructose corn syrup. We all know that that's an added sugar at this point. The orange juice. So here's what's tricky about orange juice.
Mhm.
We talked before about how oranges are a source of whole food sugar. So I see why this is tricky. But then we said that once the oranges are processed and they become orange juice, and they're usually not. So we talked about how the farthest extreme from oranges to super processed orange product is probably like orange soda. And then you kind of back up closer to the whole food and you've got juice that's maybe pressed, fresh squeezed, and that is sort of minimally processed if the pulp hasn't been removed. And it's kind of the equivalent of you just putting an orange in your blender, for example. You still got all that fibrous component, right? But then you get to, if you move a little bit closer to that orange soda, towards that processed end of the spectrum, you get to fruit juice concentrate. So a lot of the orange juice that we buy from stores without realizing it is going to be fruit juice concentrate, orange juice from concentrate. And you can see that from concentrate on usually on the front of the label. And if not on the front label, then in the ingredients list, it'll say juice from concentrate. Now that juice from concentrate is what the United Nations and their Commission on Processed Foods, they consider fruit juice from concentrate to be an added sugar. That's what's tricky about this. So the juice from concentrate, because it's had the fiber removed and it's essentially just concentrated sugar reconstituted with water, that's an added sugar. But orange juice alone, if you see fruit juice on a label, it counts as a free sugar, but not necessarily an added one. If orange juice is towards the front of the ingredients list, do you guys remember what that would mean if it's like the first ingredient? What that means about the order of
It has
ingredients?
the greatest concentration or the greatest
Yeah,
amount.
Exactly. So ingredients are listed in order of descending quantity. So if you're eating a food like an orange parfait and I don't know, it's some orange pudding or something, right? You feel fancy, you go to your cafe, you get some orange pudding, you look at the ingredients list, and it has orange juice on the ingredients list, and that's the only source of sugar. There's no oats, there's no syrup, there's no cane, anything, nothing that says sugar, right? None of our sorghum, none of our sucanat. And you see orange juice as the only source of sugar, you can consider that not technically an added sugar. If it's at the very beginning of the ingredients list, it might tell you that there's more sugar than if it's lower in the ingredients list, because there's a lower quantity of orange juice. That last bit of detail you might not have needed.
No, it was helpful because
Okay.
if you say it that way and you see it that way, then what you're saying goes back to last week. It's as close, if it comes first, it's as close to the original orange as possible in that product, in that parfait. So it's not added so much.
So you know what? That's interesting that you see it that way. So I would flip that on its head.
Okay.
So if you're eating an orange parfait, this is I'm glad that we get to do this example. If you're eating a parfait and you see orange, there's no sugar added. You check the label, none of those other sugars, right? But you see just orange. That is a whole sugar. I'm sorry, that's a whole food, right?
Whole food. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Okay.
when we're looking for even our processed foods that we're buying from the store, when we're looking to see, well, how processed is this? If I look at the ingredients list, can I find at least, a few of the ingredients at the very beginning that are most plentiful? Can I find those as whole foods?
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Then that's what you're looking for. And we kind of talked about that last week in terms of distinguishing whole foods versus ultra processed foods, or minimally processed foods versus ultra processed foods. But if we're going to talk about finding added sugars and kind of avoiding those, then in this case, having orange juice lower as kind of the only source of sugar, but one that might, have some pulp in it. Having orange juice lower in the ingredients list means that there's even less of it, which I would say is even better in this case.
Okay.
It's a kind of tricky distinction, and unfortunately, I don't think we'll actually run into that problem all that often, because most of the times when juice is added to our processed foods, it's in the form of concentrated fruit juice.
Right.
And so that's our very clear added sugar.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. So just a really quick overview. We kind of went through this, but a reminder, your sugars follow a few naming principles. First, most obvious, it may have sugar or syrup in the title, right? You already know that. If it contains the word juice, so essentially if it's a concentrated fruit juice, or say a cane juice, then that counts as an added sugar. Our fruit juices that are not from concentrate don't count as added sugars according to this UN sort of naming policy. So the easy way to remember this one is just concentrated fruit juice or cane juice. The third one we've gone over a couple times now. If it ends in ose, any of the oses, that is a sugar. And then there are a number of others that we saw that kind of fill the gap. And these are the ones you just want to study and make sure that you know them, like the sucanat, like the sorghum, even molasses, right? Things that have kind of the funnier names. And so I'm going to give you a list here. And this was actually in our newsletter that went out last week. So you can find this on the blog. If you'd like to take a picture of it, feel free to screenshot the screen so that you have it. But we've got a list of, there are at least 60 something names for added sugar. And they sort of keep growing, right? Most of these, if you scan through, have sugar or syrup in the title. And so they're actually a little bit easier to identify. We've got our fruit juice concentrate. We've got our fruit juice crystals. Again, the idea that you're just identifying, or you are pulling out you're distilling the sugar part of the fruit juice, and not including the more valuable parts of the rest of the fruit juice. So fruit juice concentrate, fruit juice crystals. We've got our oses, fructose, glucose, dextrose. But then there are others like date sugar. We've talked before about how I actually recommending substituting even a half date for added sugar, like actually in baking recipes or in, hot drinks, I'll actually mash a date. That's in lieu of using a date syrup, which is going to be just the sugar component of the date, or date sugar, which is going to be crystallized sugar component of the date. If you've eaten a date, it's just how chewy it is. There's a significant amount of fiber. So in including the whole date, chopped, perhaps mashed in a drink, in a baking recipe, you're actually getting the fiber that was meant to accompany that sugar. So you're getting those training wheels to try to avoid the giant spike that comes with added sugars. All right. Any thoughts, any questions, aside from just there being a lot to
I put a question in the chat.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Stevia and monk fruit. These are good questions. So, So stevia and monk fruit come from plants. As far as I know, stevia has the sugar component distilled from it still. Like, we're not eating the actual plant. We're not eating the fibrous portion. And so that counts as an added sugar in that case, even if it seems to be, even if it might be called more healthy than many other forms of sugar. What I can't remember right now, though, is whether stevia is stevia the 0-calorie sugar? Or I think it may just be a lower.
I think it's 0 calorie.
Okay. So, if stevia is giving you 0 calories, then I'd certainly recommend it over the other sort of artificial sugars like aspartame, that
That's in
are
this
0.
extra free gum that I'm eating.
Yeah,
That's
it's
on my
in just
extra
about
way.
everything. It's in just about everything, but you're like 2 calories from that sugar-free gum, or you're, I guess, no calories, right? But the little bit of aspartame you're getting from that, it's probably not going to make much of a difference. But some studies have suggested that eating this, large amounts of aspartame long term. So if there was like a favorite, I don't know, a favorite dessert, a favorite muffin, what have you, that used aspartame as a 0 calorie artificial sweetener, and you just had multiple muffins a day. Studies have suggested that aspartame actually changes gut flora in a way that could actually increase the risk of obesity. And scientists are still understanding what it means for the distribution of bacteria in the gut, what it means for us to have more healthy bacteria, less healthy bacteria, how that reflects on chronic disease risk, like obesity, type 2 diabetes, etc. So all of that is to say, I'm sure your aspartame gum is just fine, especially if it's doing something like curbing cravings, for example, or helping you maintain portion size. All of that is probably a better outcome. That benefit is probably greater than the very little risk, if any.
I think my issue is not necessarily eating stuff like that on a regular basis. It's when cortisol is raised, when stress, happens. That's when it becomes more
Yeah.
difficult for me, because those are like comfort foods. I know you can do something else. I'm sorry, I'm in the gym, so
No.
it's kind of loud. But if you do, yeah, that's my problem. It's like
Yeah.
being able to manage the stress and like finding another alternative really quickly before I get to
Yeah.
something that's gonna have sugar or a lot of carbs and stuff like that. The chips is
Have you
my
noticed?
go-to. Oh yeah, I noticed it yesterday. Yesterday, I was like, but I was very aware of it, and I still couldn't stop myself from eating chips. I was like, oh my god! But later on, I had this great salad and with blueberries and spinach and all that. And I didn't eat any more, but I did say that was exactly the result of the stress that I was feeling in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
But it was very difficult to manage it a different way besides going what my habitual way would be, and that's like these two chips.
Yeah. Well, so kudos to you on recognizing that. This is something that we talked about last week, that sort of mindfulness component, just recognizing when I've got any emotion, when I feel a certain way, when there is a certain stimulus, how do my cravings respond? And so you've already recognized that. I guess the next question is, what can you do to shift your environment so that either it's harder for you to get to the chips, so you're less likely to grab for them, and if you have to work really, really hard, then will you eventually forget? Some studies on smoking cessation have found that if people just pause anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes when they have a craving for cigarettes, the craving passes. And that's so 5 to 15 minutes can sound like a whole lot when you really want it and you're feeling stressed out, and that that's what tends to make you feel better in the moment. But that's where the question of, is it possible to not have chips at arm's reach? Or if you're coming home from work, is it possible to drive a route where you're just not going to get access to chips? Does any of that sound like stuff you've tried before?
Well, I think the study, just what you just said. So when the situation happened, I wasn't home. I don't keep chips in the house, but I went to
Yeah.
CVS and bought some chips because I was close to CVS.
Yeah.
But knowing what the study says around, like, okay, if you wait 5 to 15 minutes, like that'll be in my brain now. Okay, Michelle, I know you really want these chips, but if you wait for 5 to 15 minutes, you'll feel better. Like that'll help me more than, because I can go buy chips anywhere I want to buy.
Right.
Like it's not like they're
Right.
at home. I just went. I actually didn't
Yeah.
have to pay because I had a reward, $5 reward.
There you
But
go.
but having the understand what the research says about craving cessation, I think is helpful for me. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. Well, you know what? You all,
You know, can I bring
As-
up one
huh?
quick point? I know we're getting really close to our time, but you mentioned aspartame. I think we talked about this in Share and Savor, I'm not sure, about diet sodas and the aspartame in diet sodas and how it's actually more harmful because
Mhm.
you have this sense that you're getting something that you think is 0 calorie, but it actually changes your gut flora. And people who drink like Diet Cokes every single day routinely actually gain more weight when they do that than if they just every once in a while just have a diet soda.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that, Dr. Bridget. The just a comment on that, the effect of 0 calorie free sweeteners, and I know that's not what you all were discussing here. We were talking about these non-artificial sweeteners, stevia as a plant-based 0 calorie sweetener. Their effect on weight is twofold. So there's this psychological component where if you know that you're eating a lower or drinking a lower calorie dish, then you believe that you deserve a reward. And so you're more likely to, if you were going to like get a Diet Coke at the drive-through, then you're more likely to maybe supersize the rest of your meal because I can get away with it because I just saved myself all those calories. That sort of mentality has been identified in the body of research, but scientists have also tried to control for that psychological component through blinded studies where they've given people foods that contained these artificial 0 calorie sweeteners like aspartame without the people knowing that they were eating 0 calories. And then they followed weight. One arm of the study would get these 0 calorie sweeteners like aspartame, these artificial sweeteners. And the other arm of the study would get regular sugar, etc. And there was actually not the drop in weight that you would expect from the people eating the 0 calorie or the artificially sweetened products. And that's where the hypothesis came from that perhaps there's actually a shift in gut metabolism or in the gut flora. And so further downstream, other studies have actually done things like taken stool samples of people eating these foods and analyzed them for the composition of the bacteria and been able to find that, yes, the artificial 0 calorie sweeteners change gut flora. And we still don't know exactly what that means, right? But somehow there's an association with weight gain beyond what we would expect in someone eating, this 0 calorie ingredient. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that, Dr. Bridget, because yeah, there's, the psychological part of eating is a really big deal. So could we extrapolate what we know about reward and these artificial 0 calorie sweeteners to maybe plant-based 0 calorie sweeteners? Is it possible that maybe using stevia might make us eat more or lower quality foods throughout the rest of the day because we feel so good about the stevia? I think each person just sort of has to identify their own dietary patterns. I don't think that's necessarily a given for everyone, but it's something to kind of keep in mind. We have gone well over our time. I thank you for all of the participation. These are really great questions and such helpful additions to the conversation. Anything else on your minds? If not, I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Again, wonderful conversation. See, hopefully all of you, if not some of you, next week, we'll be continuing the conversation on balance.
All right.
Thank you.
Mm,
Bye.
bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.